There is something unsettling about a person who does not seek approval. They do not over-explain. They do not shrink to soften others. They do not rush to reassure. And almost immediately, the label appears. Arrogant. But what people call arrogance is often just confidence without apology. Society is comfortable with insecurity. It understands self-doubt. It rewards performative humility. But it becomes suspicious of internal authority. Because confidence without validation cannot be controlled. This is the psychology of why strong minds are misread. Why composure is mistaken for coldness. And why true confidence rarely explains itself. 1. Social systems require signals of submission. Every social system runs on signals. Not laws. Not rules written on paper. Signals. Micro-expressions. Tone adjustments. Carefully softened opinions. Strategic laughter. Self-deprecation disguised as humility. From childhood, people are trained to send these signals. Lower your voice when corrected. Smile when challenged. Add disclaimers before strong opinions. Say, I might be wrong, even when you're not. These behaviors are not random. They are social lubrication. They communicate one thing clearly. I am not a threat. Groups survive through stability. Stability requires predictability. And predictability is maintained when individuals subtly demonstrate submission to group norms. Submission does not mean weakness in the obvious sense. It means alignment. It means showing that you value acceptance. That you care about approval. That you are adjustable. Confidence disrupts this exchange. A confident person does not over-soften truth. They do not rush to dilute their opinions. They do not constantly signal emotional dependency. They speak directly. They remain composed under scrutiny. They do not collapse into nervous laughter when tension rises. And this absence of submission creates friction. Because when someone does not signal compliance, the system does not know where to place them. Hierarchy becomes uncertain. If you do not seek approval, are you above it? If you do not react to criticism, are you unaffected or unafraid? If you do not explain yourself repeatedly, are you confident or dismissive? The group begins searching for answers. And when it cannot categorize you, it often categorizes you negatively. Arrogant. Cold. Detached. But these labels are protective mechanisms. They protect the comfort of the majority. Because when someone stops signaling submission, others must confront their own dependence on it. Most social interaction is reassurance disguised as conversation. People check constantly. Are we aligned? Do you approve of me? Am I safe in your perception? This is why disagreement makes people uncomfortable. Not because disagreement is dangerous, but because it threatens belonging. Confidence does not panic under disagreement. It does not rush to restore harmony at its own expense. And that refusal to self-adjust can feel like rejection to those who equate agreement with connection. Here is the deeper truth. Many people do not dislike arrogance. They dislike independence. Because independence removes leverage. If you cannot be influenced by praise, you cannot be steered by it. If you do not fear exclusion, you cannot be controlled through it. If you do not constantly signal need, you cannot be managed through approval. And that unsettles systems built on subtle emotional negotiation. So the confident individual becomes too much. Too direct. Too composed. Too unmoved. But what appears excessive is often just unfiltered self-trust. Confidence does not bow to every opinion. It does not perform insecurity to comfort observers. It does not shrink to maintain fragile balance. And when someone refuses to shrink, Others feel exposed in their shrinking. This is why strong minds are misinterpreted. Not because they dominate. Not because they belittle. But because they do not participate in the silent ritual of submission. Social systems require constant validation exchange to feel stable. Confidence interrupts that exchange. And anything that interrupts comfort is labeled dangerous, even when it is simply self-assured. 2. Why strong minds are called cold. Emotional systems expect reciprocity. When someone expresses excitement, they expect enthusiasm in return. When someone vents frustration, they expect visible sympathy. When someone shares insecurity, they expect reassurance. This is the invisible contract of social comfort. Emotion is offered. Emotion is mirrored. Connection is confirmed. But strong minds do not always mirror. They listen without dramatizing. They observe without absorbing. They remain steady when others fluctuate. And steadiness, in an emotionally reactive environment, feels unnatural. Most people regulate themselves through others. If the room is tense, they become tense. If someone is upset, they absorb it. If energy rises, they rise with it. This mutual regulation creates bonding. But it also creates dependency. A strong mind regulates internally. It does not borrow emotion from the room. It does not escalate to match intensity. It does not collapse to match vulnerability. It remains anchored. And anchoring looks like distance to those who rely on shared emotional movement. When someone cannot pull you into their emotional state, they may interpret it as rejection. If you do not react strongly, they assume you do not care. If you do not overvalidate, they assume you are indifferent. If you do not dramatize concern, they assume you lack empathy. But empathy does not require performance. Understanding does not require exaggeration. And care does not require collapse. Strong minds understand something subtle. You can acknowledge emotion without being governed by it. You can listen without losing composure. You can support without surrendering stability. But because this form of presence is quiet, it is easily misread. There is another layer. Emotional intensity often signals investment. The louder the defense, the stronger the attachment appears. The more animated the reaction, the more people assume passion. Calm responses challenge this assumption. When you stay composed during conflict, others may question your commitment. Why aren't you more upset? Why don't you seem bothered? Why are you so calm? Because calmness disrupts the expected script. Most arguments escalate because both sides mirror intensity. But when one person refuses to escalate, the emotional energy has nowhere to go. It falls flat. And in that flatness, the other person feels exposed. They are emotional. You are stable. They are reactive. You are deliberate. This contrast can feel humiliating. So instead of acknowledging imbalance, they shift interpretation. You're cold. Cold is easier to accept than controlled. Cold suggests lack. Controlled suggests strength. There is also discomfort in unpredictability. If someone is emotionally expressive, you can anticipate their reactions. But when someone remains composed under pressure, you cannot easily read them. And what cannot be read cannot be easily influenced. Strong minds are difficult to provoke. They do not flare up on command. They do not reveal insecurity quickly. They do not surrender emotional tells. This ambiguity creates unease. Because influence requires emotional openings. When those openings are limited, control becomes difficult. So the narrative shifts again. They're detached. They're unfeeling. They're distant. But in reality, they are disciplined. They choose when to express. They choose when to react. They choose when to invest emotionally. And choice feels like coldness to those who operate on impulse. The strongest individuals are not emotionally absent. They are emotionally selective. They do not broadcast every reaction. They do not externalize every thought. They do not leak insecurity into the environment. They conserve energy. They conserve words. They conserve expression. In a culture that equates visibility with sincerity, restraint is misinterpreted. But restraint is not lack. It is mastery. Strong minds are called cold, because they do not beg for connection. They do not overperform warmth. They do not chase approval through exaggerated empathy. They do not need constant emotional exchange to feel secure. They are steady. And steadiness, to the emotionally dependent, feels like distance. But distance is not hostility. It is simply the space required for self-governance. 3. The difference between arrogance and confidence. Arrogance and confidence can look similar from a distance. Both appear certain. Both appear steady. Both appear unapologetic. But internally, they are opposites. Arrogance is fragile. Confidence is stable. Arrogance is built on comparison. Confidence is built on alignment. This distinction changes everything. Arrogance needs hierarchy. It requires someone beneath it to feel secure. It measures worth through contrast. It feels taller only when someone else feels smaller. That is why arrogance announces itself. It interrupts. It corrects publicly. It dominates conversations. It seeks visible superiority. Because arrogance is performing strength. And performance requires witnesses. Confidence does not perform. It does not need to be the loudest voice in the room. It does not need to correct every mistake. It does not feel urgency to prove intelligence. Confidence is internally referenced. It measures itself against its own standards, not against other people. This makes it quiet. And quiet strength is often misread by those who only recognize volume. Here is the deeper psychology. Arrogance is often a defense mechanism. When someone overstates certainty, dismisses others, or exaggerates competence, it is frequently compensation. Compensation for insecurity. Compensation for instability. Compensation for fear of being exposed. The arrogant person cannot tolerate doubt, because doubt threatens identity. So they eliminate it externally. They reject opposing views quickly. They mock disagreement. They inflate achievements. They need to control perception, because their self-worth depends on it. Confidence does not collapse under doubt. It can admit ignorance without humiliation. It can accept correction without hostility. It can lose an argument without losing identity. This is the clearest psychological marker. Arrogance defends image. Confidence protects integrity. Arrogance reacts emotionally to challenge. Confidence evaluates challenge calmly. Arrogance sees disagreement as disrespect. Confidence sees disagreement as information. One is threatened by difference. The other is strengthened by it. There is also a difference in energy. Arrogance feels tense. You can sense it. There is sharpness in the tone. There is subtle hostility in disagreement. There is a need to assert dominance. Confidence feels relaxed. There is no rush. No strain in the posture. No urgency to overpower. Because confidence does not fear being diminished. It understands something arrogance does not. Power does not decrease when shared. Arrogance hoards authority. Confidence distributes it. An arrogant person struggles when others succeed. It feels like subtraction. A confident person is unthreatened by others' competence. Because their identity is not comparative. Here is where society becomes confused. When someone does not self-deprecate. When they do not downplay achievements. When they speak plainly about their strengths. Observers conditioned to equate humility with insecurity may interpret it as arrogance. But humility and insecurity are not the same. True humility does not deny strength. It simply does not obsess over it. Confidence can acknowledge capability without broadcasting superiority. It can say, calmly, "I'm good at this." And leave it there. No inflation. No apology. Arrogance would say, "I'm better than everyone at this." Confidence says, "I know my ability." And moves on. The difference is not volume. It is dependence. Arrogance depends on external reinforcement. Confidence does not. Arrogance must be seen as powerful. Confidence is powerful whether seen or not. Arrogance seeks control over perception. Confidence is indifferent to perception. And indifference is often misinterpreted. Because many people operate within perception-based systems. They manage how they are viewed. They adjust personality to maintain likability. They soften truths to preserve approval. When someone refuses to manage perception constantly, it disrupts expectations. And disruption is uncomfortable. So instead of analyzing their own discomfort, observers simplify the narrative. Arrogant. But what unsettles them is not superiority. It is independence. Confidence removes the need for negotiation. It does not bargain for acceptance. It does not perform humility to reduce threat. It does not collapse to reassure insecurity. It stands steady, unconcerned with comparison. Arrogance stands on others. Confidence stands on itself. That is the difference. And that difference is invisible to those who only recognize strength when it is loud. 4. Why internal authority threatens social control. Control rarely looks like control. It looks like approval. It looks like belonging. It looks like shared values. But beneath every social structure lies influence. And influence requires leverage. Leverage comes from need. If you need validation, you can be steered with praise. If you fear rejection, you can be shaped with exclusion. If you crave acceptance, you can be adjusted through subtle disapproval. This is how most social systems maintain order. Not through force. Through psychological dependency. Internal authority breaks this mechanism. A person with internal authority does not outsource identity. They do not wait for applause to confirm worth. They do not collapse when criticized. They do not inflate when praised. They are self-referenced. And a self-referenced individual is difficult to control. Because you cannot reward them into obedience. You cannot shame them into submission. You cannot withhold approval to manipulate direction. This is where discomfort begins. Groups unconsciously test autonomy. They apply mild pressure. Subtle jokes. Light criticism. Social comparison. Passive disapproval. Most people adjust. They laugh along. They soften their stance. They recalibrate tone. But the internally anchored individual does not bend easily. They do not overcorrect. They do not scramble to restore harmony at personal cost. They do not negotiate their values for comfort. This refusal destabilizes invisible hierarchies. Because social control depends on responsiveness. If you cannot provoke reaction, you cannot calibrate influence. If you cannot induce insecurity, you cannot create compliance. Internal authority removes emotional entry points. And when emotional entry points are closed, external power weakens. This is why strong individuals are often tested more aggressively. When subtle pressure fails, pressure intensifies. Direct confrontation, public challenges, character questioning. Not always consciously malicious, but strategically revealing. The system is probing for weakness. It is asking, where is your insecurity? What do you fear losing? How can you be moved? If it finds none easily accessible, it grows uneasy. Because predictability is control's foundation. And internally governed individuals are less predictable. They do not react on cue. They do not mirror emotional tone automatically. They do not prioritize comfort over principle. This creates ambiguity. And ambiguity threatens dominant structures. In many environments, workplaces, social groups, even families, control is maintained through shared emotional norms. You should feel guilty. You should feel embarrassed. You should feel pressured. When someone does not feel what they are told to feel, authority weakens. Internal authority says, I will decide what this means. I will choose how to respond. I will evaluate this independently. That independence is quiet rebellion. Not loud. Not dramatic. But structurally disruptive. Because once one person operates without emotional coercion, others begin noticing. If approval is not mandatory. If shame is not binding. If exclusion is not fatal. Then the entire leverage system softens. And systems resist that. This is why labels are deployed strategically. Arrogant. Difficult. Uncooperative. Intimidating. Labels are containment tools. They attempt to socially penalize autonomy. The message beneath them is clear. Return to compliance. But the internally authoritative person does not panic under labeling. They understand something Machiavelli understood centuries ago. Dependence invites control. Independence invites resistance. True power does not scream. It detaches. And detachment is dangerous. To systems built on emotional obligation, internal authority does not seek to dominate. It simply refuses to be dominated. That refusal alone reshapes the hierarchy. Because control functions best when it is invisible. The moment someone proves it ineffective, it becomes visible. And visible control loses legitimacy. This is why internally anchored individuals often feel isolated. Not because they reject others, but because they reject invisible strings. And when strings no longer work, those holding them must choose. Adapt. Or resent. Most resent. Because adapting would require building their own internal authority. And that is far more difficult than controlling someone else's. 5. Why confidence does not need validation or explanation. At its core, validation is a request. A request to be seen. A request to be approved. A request to be confirmed. There is nothing inherently wrong with it. But when validation becomes necessary for stability, identity becomes negotiable. And negotiable identity is fragile. Confidence eliminates the negotiation. Not because it rejects connection. Not because it dismisses others. But because it is internally concluded. A confident person has already had the argument within themselves. They have examined their flaws. Measured their strengths. Confronted their insecurities. They do not require the room to finalize what they already understand. This is what makes them appear different. Most people are externally calibrated. They adjust based on feedback. They refine based on reaction. They stabilize based on approval. Confidence is internally calibrated. It listens, but it does not depend. It considers, but it does not collapse. It adapts, but it does not surrender. There is a psychological shift that happens. When someone stops seeking validation, they become less explainable. Because explanation is often reassurance disguised as clarity. When people over-explain, they are not just sharing information. They are managing perception. They are softening judgment, preempting criticism, reducing the risk of rejection. Confidence does not rush to manage perception. It speaks clearly, then allows interpretation to exist. This can feel unsettling. Because when someone does not chase understanding, it forces others to confront their own assumptions. Silence after a statement. Calm after disagreement. Stillness after accusation. No frantic clarification. No defensive elaboration. Just presence. And presence without panic is difficult to challenge. Here is the deeper psychology. The need to explain often comes from fear. Fear of being disliked. Fear of being misjudged. Fear of losing belonging. Confidence accepts a hard truth. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will approve. Not everyone will stay. And survival does not depend on changing that. This acceptance creates gravity. When someone is no longer persuading you to approve of them, you feel it. There is weight in their posture. Precision in their words. Economy in their reactions. Because energy is no longer spent securing acceptance. It is invested in alignment. Alignment with values. Alignment with standards. Alignment with self. This is why confidence does not argue endlessly. It states once. It clarifies if necessary. Then it moves. It does not debate identity. Arrogance defends identity aggressively. Confidence protects it quietly. If someone calls a confident person arrogant, they do not unravel. Because labels only destabilize those who depend on them. Confidence does not require applause to exist. It does not require agreement to remain steady. It does not require validation to feel real. It knows. And knowing is different from proving. Proving is outward. Knowing is internal. Proving seeks audience. Knowing requires none. This is the final distinction. Confidence does not perform worth. It embodies it. And embodiment is silent. In a world conditioned to explain, defend, justify, and soften, the person who simply stands firm, without hostility, without apology, without theatrical dominance, will always be misunderstood. But misunderstanding does not weaken them. Because confidence was never built on being understood. It was built on being certain. And certainty, when quiet, is the most immovable form of power.